has gender equality got to do with men at all? And what has gender equality got to do with the Men's Development Network? We work to achieve a mission that says better lives for men, better lives for all. And we look to achieve this in a variety of ways. Alan has covered some of these, but I just want to go back over them. We work with men to address the issues facing themselves, their communities and their families. And we work with men to take responsibility for their own health. We work to train and support those offering services to men, particularly in the health service, so that men feel more able to access those services. We work with men who are violent in their relationships, supporting them to make changes in the way they are in that relationship to improve the safety of women and children. This also has a huge, powerful effect, we know, on the lives of the men themselves. We work to support other men to identify the issues impacting on their lives and seek ways to change them. And we encourage and support men to identify their needs and provide a platform to advocate that change. I'm 62, so I've been a man, I don't know, maybe for 40 years. I've been a husband and a partner for 40 years, on the 13th of May this year. I've done the shopping, found a Ruby. I've been a father of daughters for 36 years and a father of a son for 28. And indeed, I'm a grandfather of 6 grandchildren for that, so spread over the last 8 years. I've been part of the Men's Development Network, and I've been sitting in men's groups with men that a lot of them are in this room, and it's a delight to be here and to see us all together. It's really incredible. There are men that have sat in rooms with me 16 years ago, and it really strikes me, just moved me as much as the last poem to be here with, be with the rest of you. I got one of the lads on registration to do a tot. Basically, there are as many men here as there are women, which is really significant. This was a women's issue. It's now all our issue. The numbers here just tell us that, and we enforce it again and again. So I've been sitting in men's groups for 16 years, initially just being listened to and supported, and then I grew a pair of listening ears and a more open heart, and was able to listen and support the men sitting with me. This is where I learned this stuff, sitting with men. I learned to receive support and challenge, to hear and see men modelling how to identify what lay heavy on their heart, and how to find courage to see and feel the best and the worst of me. I work in groups nowadays, week in, week out, mostly groups of men, from a huge variety of men. And I hear how it is to be a man today, how it is to be a man returning from homelessness, how it is to be a man who's approaching old age and experiencing unemployment for the first time in his life, how it is to be a traveller man, marginalised again and again and again, how it is to be a father trying to parent separately, how it is to be a father in recovery from heroin addiction and trying to stay connected with his children, how it is to be a man meeting his commitments, how it is to be caring for a beloved partner of many years who is moving inexorably into dementia. How it is to be a young dad trying to wrestle services out of the system for his son who has severe challenging behaviours. I've been doing that kind of work for the past 7 years, and as I said, I'm a part of a men's group for myself, and still am, week in, week out. I've developed a series of thoughts on how we become the men we are, and I'd like to talk about that. I'd also like to talk about the possibility of becoming a different kind of a man than the man we have become. I'd like to explore a bit how it is to be, how as men we respond and react to women, how we respond and react to violence, and how we respond and react to belonging. I'd also, towards the end, like to take an uncharacteristic wander from me into the world of virtual world online and talk a bit about online misogyny. There's only one bit of study I ever did about psychology, and it was about a man called Adler. And so it's the only bit that I know. And I trust it because it sits well with me. He suggested that our conditioning is put in place before the age of 5. And that was written in the early 20th century. Nowadays, I think it's before the age of 10. And I say that because at 5 years of age, as boys, we moved out of the home and begin to rub up against other boys and discover the rules that apply in teams, in classrooms, in schoolyards, on the bus, and we discover how these rules are enforced and the sanctions applied for going against them, and the rewards available to those who conform. Sorry, we learn a few simple codes of practice that make it safe for us to be in the company of other boys. We need to be strong or fast. We need to be stoic. We need to be resilient. We need to be able to bounce back. We need to be self-reliant. And we need to demonstrate again and again that we're not a girl. We learned these lessons because they're put across rationally and by implication at home by the adults in our lives. And then they're enforced mercilessly, that's my memory, by our peers. Mercilessly because by enforcing them on others, we confirm them in ourselves. That's how we got to belong. We were encouraged to compete with our peers in varying kinds of combat against other boys. We were encouraged to be a winner, forgetting that there was always going to be a loser. I remember looking at a chart of a knockout competition and realizing that of the 16 teams, there was only going to be one winner. So there were 15 losers. They taught us how to win, but they never taught us how to live with losing. And as teams and individuals progress through the competition, more and more is invested in winning, and the consequent impact of losing is greater and greater. We were taught that it was right and proper to swallow our pain and our distress. A bad loser got upset and couldn't handle it. Same for physical hurt, don't cry. For emotional hurt, straight back, eyes up, just in case somebody sees the hurt in your eyes. You looked away. Get back up on the bike, the horse, back in the water. Get over the fright and the pain and the fear. And we needed to do this alone because no one else feels like this. Everyone is living by the rules and showing no weakness, no vulnerability. This conditioning sets the rules by how, as a man, I learned to move through the world. They were taught to me in the 1950s. And I saw another version of them in the 1980s when my son was a boy. Different, but not that different. And I'm seeing another version now with my 4 grandsons. R.W. Connell wonderfully and nearly poetically wrote about the patriarchy that Michael talked about. He described something, a great set of words called a hegemonic patriarchal dividend. He says every man derives a benefit from the history of patriarchy, and every woman suffers a disadvantage. It is by sitting with men, paradoxically, that I have learned that I have a responsibility to live and model the contradiction of that patriarchy. Going against the rules, contradicting this conditioning, is not taken on lightly. First of all, I have to overcome my own reluctance to put myself at risk. Then I have to speak, I have to find ways to speak and behave that fit how I want to be in the world. Then I have to find a safe place to practice them. Then I have to gather my courage in my hands and act out of that conviction. I'm a sound man, however I am. I can be an older, physically struggling man with a history of heart attack. I can speak of how I feel vulnerable, weak, or not coping when depression disables me. I can struggle to bounce back after a trial. I can be exhausted after speaking at a conference like this. Or I can shake with fear as I did before speaking at a conference like this. I can speak of these things feeling feelings like shame, embarrassment, or blind funk, and know now that I don't die of them anymore. By contradicting my conditioning, I can remain myself and stay whole and well and make a contribution. What is it that we learned about violence? This, I think, is still very much the same as it was in the 50s. We learned that we had to compete to be physically on top, that there was a cost to being weak. The cost of being weak was to be outside, to not belong, to be available for besting in competition as others sought to prove their belonging. Delivering physical, verbal or emotional violence put us on the inside. Receiving it put us outside the pale. It's a no-brainer. A huge high-octane seductive mixture for an isolated boy or a young man or a grown man. What did this world teach me about women? I grew up in a household with 6 strong women. I have 5 sisters and 2 brothers, and had a mother that modelled a way of being that said, in letters 6 feet high, every one of you have the same responsibilities, every one of you have the same entitlements, and every one of you will have the same opportunities. It was the 1950s, so the opportunities weren't exactly generous, but they were there. Unfortunately, I had a father who modelled in his relationship with my mother another version of entitlement. He was violent and controlling. He was also controlling with his children. My mother modelled an appropriate response to this eventually when she could, when our children were safely grown, by leaving and supporting us to find our way into independence. And this was in the 60s, in the days before Erin Pizzey and the first refuges. So not as old as I am, Erin Pizzey was the woman who established refuges for the first time in the UK. I remember seeing her on television. I recently worked on a gender mainstreaming framework for the HSE entitled Equal but Different. And that really catches what I was left with by my home. That was my picture of gender in my home. The only sports people in my house were my 3 sisters who were ferocious camogie players. And they still, the idea of it still terrified me. It was in the days before people wore helmets. I remember one of them coming home with a flat bruise all along the face, which she wore somehow or another quite proudly. However, out in the rough and tumble world of school, the girl was weaker, less fleet of foot, less strong, less able physically, and all of this left her lacking. There was no acknowledgement of difference, or what we now call diversity. Girls wept, or were likely to, or were permitted to. They were entitled to shielding or protection by their brothers or their men. They didn't have to stand up for themselves. They were entitled to be comforted. So women were to be cherished and protected, but who protected them when they needed protection from their men? Then, as we grew into men, we discovered that women were to be desired, and mixed this in with our wish not to be like them at all costs. A wonderful dose of confusion. So we learned that to be a man meant to belong, and we now know that to contradict that way of being is to risk not belonging. So how do we navigate these rapids? How do we find the words, the language, the grammar, the tone of voice to challenge sexist cognitive behaviour and still find a way to belong? It takes practice and a bit of courage. The clues are in the rules that we learned. If we behave in what I describe as a man-to-man fashion, we can be heard by other men. And if we start with the small issues and work up to speaking out against violence, we might get there. In tone, I think it means that we learn to be assertive and direct, not engaging or aggressive, but direct and plain speaking, giving the other man the opportunity to reflect. Our approach needs to be about making our point, not engaging in negotiation or discussion, but asking him to see his action or comment in the light of how he sees himself as a man. When I hear a sexist comment, I try to say, I don't like sexist comments. Let's not do that anymore. This leaves us both a bit vulnerable, invites the speaker to belong a bit, and gives him a way out. When I hear a sexist joke, I look to find the heart to say, what is it about that joke that you think is funny? This allows for a connection with the man. Let's make it a supportive connection. When we have become less uncomfortable thinking these thoughts and expressing them clearly, we can begin to develop our thoughts and words for speaking out against all violence against women. So we need to connect with men in ways that assist them to end the ways that demean women. And we also need to speak out in other fora like this one. We need to begin to develop our thoughts and words for speaking out about all violence against women: physical violence, sexual violence, and emotional violence. There's a I've recently been part of a conversation about the level of misogyny online. Women who express themselves strongly in online forums or take stands are attacked in a most wretched and vile way. I think that the anonymity of the internet allows some men to safely act out the worst of their fears with real hatred and threatening language. The internet, other than email and things like that, is a foreign country to me. I ask those, I think younger, but maybe not necessarily, maybe that's my bit of stereotyping, those men who live and work in the areas that operate on the internet to make clear that this abuse is unacceptable. Misogyny is the hatred of women, and it's completely unacceptable. It's a man's work to challenge this behaviour, to put it plainly and clearly that this abuse is wrong. This way, men are less likely to feel so isolated, disconnected, unaware that they're drawn to put this stuff up on the internet. I'm particularly struck by Michael's story about the 21-year-olds and each one of them not wanting to, but unafraid to say no. And I think that's the key. The bottom line is that men must stop being misogynist. And as men, we need to tell other men that very clearly. Thank you for listening. As I tried out my thinking about men speaking out, I ask you gently and fiercely, as men, to speak out gently and fiercely. It is a task, a responsibility that we have, and acting out of our manhood, I know that we can take.